Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and today we're out here taking a look at the 2014 Volkswagen Passat TDI. This is the only mid-size sedan sold in America right now that has a diesel engine underneath the hood. And trust me, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. Definitely not my father's Oldsmobile either, because that's exactly what I learned how to drive in, a 1982 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra diesel. Very much like the current generation Honda Accord, the Passat is very elegant and restrained, something that I definitely like in this segment. I think that the Mazda 6 and the Ford Fusion are probably the most attractive entries in the segment, but I would definitely tie this with the Honda Accord as second best looking right here in the mid-size sedan segment. I think that this general kind of styling will age better than the swoopy lines that you find in the current generation Kia and Hyundai products, definitely more attractive than the current generation Toyota Camry. We have this very horizontal front Volkswagen grille up here. It definitely looks like all the other Volkswagen products going on in America. The other thing you need to know about the Passat is that they've really tried to target it a little bit down market compared to the previous generations of the Passat. Pricing is a little bit lower, and we don't have the same kind of luxury features that you used to be able to find in the Passat maybe about 10 years ago or so. The side profile of the Passat is fairly plain, just like most entries in this segment. I have called a number of those other entries boring, and that same descriptor would probably have to apply to the Passat as well. I do find this general look elegant, however, something that appeals to me. One thing to note right back here is the rear door, and that's because the Passat in this generation is a decent amount bigger than prior generations of the Passat for North America, because this is not the European Passat. This is a North American exclusive Passat. It's a little bit bigger to compete with the likes of the Honda Accord, the Camry, as well as the Ford Fusion. The same simple and elegant styling continues around the back. We have a single chrome strip running along the back right here. We have a single chrome exhaust tip over there for the TDI model. And really the only way you know that this is the TDI model is by this little TDI badge right here. So there are no funky blue headlamps or blue badges or blue grille inserts or anything like that going on for the turbo diesel model, just this little TDI badge right here. Under the hood, we have this 2-liter turbo diesel engine. It produces 140 horsepower and 236 pound-feet of torque, and it of course uses a turbocharger, making it very different from those old Oldsmobile diesels that I used to drive when I was a kid. This is a little bit less powerful than the planned Mazda 6 diesel, which is a 2.2-liter 173 horsepower engine with 310 pound-feet of torque, but I am told that this engine is fairly easy to tune if you're willing to risk your warranty by installing an aftermarket ECU on it. This engine is mated to either your choice of a 6-speed manual transmission that's available in the SE model only, or a 6-speed DSG like our vehicle is equipped right now. One thing that bugs me a little bit about the Passat is right here, because even though the Passat requires diesel exhaust fluid, you won't find the filler neck right here with the diesel fluid. You'll find it in the trunk. To fill the exhaust fluid yourself, you have to go into the trunk, and then right here on the right side is where you'll find the filler port for the diesel exhaust fluid. You of course have to use a funnel, and you do risk getting that exhaust fluid on the inside of your car. Fortunately, it doesn't really stink, but I do find that just to be a little bit of a pain versus other cars where they put the diesel exhaust fluid filler right there with the diesel filler. Front seat comfort in the Passat is very good, but it's not necessarily my favorite in the segment, and that comes down to the seat adjustability. This seat adjustment mechanism allows you to raise and lower the back of the seat, but not the front of the seat. So that front seat portion is always fixed. Kind of made my legs go to sleep. We do have a 2-way adjustable lumbar support and a multi-position memory right here in the seat, along with a tilt telescoping steering wheel. You should spend a decent amount of time checking out the seats in a car, because what I find annoying to me may not be annoying to you. What meets my body shape's requirements may not meet your body shape's requirements, so that is something very important to keep in mind. These seats are not terribly heavily bolstered, which might make it easier for larger people to find comfortable seating positions in the Passat. Because the Passat has grown in this generation, these rear seats are enormous. Sitting behind myself, I still have about a foot of legroom left over here. If I move over to the right side of the car, this front seat was adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. I still have about 3 inches of legroom left behind that front seat. These bottom seat cushions are a little bit close to the floor for my tastes, but they are definitely suitable for children who will find them more comfortable. This rear armrest has 2 fixed position cup holders and a little storage cubby right there. It is fairly comfortable. Because we're in the SEL model, our seats are covered in this leather as well as faux suede fabric. A nice touch in the back of the Passat is the fact that these rear door panels aren't noticeably cheaper than the front door panels. That does happen a lot in cars where the rear plastics tend to get harder and nastier than the front plastics. That's not going on here in the Passat. These aren't exactly class-leading still, but they are very nice. We do have a power lock and unlock button in the rear, which is kind of an interesting twist. Let's take a quick look around the interior of the Passat. We have height adjustable front seat belts there for the driver and front passenger. I do apologize for the lighting. It is a little bit bright and harsh today. Our front seats are covered in the same leather and suede fabric as I showed you in the rear seats. That's what it looks like there. If we move on to the front door panels, you'll notice that this is fake wood, but it is very believable fake wood. It's probably the best fake wood that I've seen lately. Soft touch upper panels in the doors, hard touch lower panels with a soft touch door armrest right there, and this portion right here is also pleather. Moving over to the dashboard, we have this classic Volkswagen simple and elegant styling going on with a fairly flat dashboard that goes all the way across to the single hump that holds the instrument cluster right there for the driver. Moving down the center console, we have two large air vents. These do not have open and close knobs. That was one obvious cost-cutting measure in this generation of Passat. Moving down, we have Volkswagen's standard infotainment head unit. If you want to know more about this, then just go ahead and click that link at the bottom of your screen. We're not going to clutter up these video reviews with infotainment reviews, so click on over there if you want to know more about this. Below that, we have our 2-zone climate control. We also have our heated seat buttons right there. We have a storage cubby right in front of the shifter, and this also houses a 12-volt power outlet. We have the shifter for our DSG transmission as well as our start-stop button. That's because we're in a model with keyless go. These are button blanks around the shifter module. They would be used for other added features if our Passat had them. Moving further down, we have two large cup holders, obviously designed for the American market in mind, easily capable of storing large takeout cups. Then we have our center armrest, and if we open that, you won't find a usual USB port in this car like you would in something like an American or Japanese car. Instead, we have a regular old auxiliary input there, a 12-volt outlet, and then we have this funky Volkswagen multimedia interface device cable, which is optional. It's not included with your Passat at this time. Uses a proprietary Volkswagen connector there, and then it gives you an Apple dock connector there. You can also get one with a USB input. This does work well with modern iOS devices with Apple's adapter. Over on the driver's side, we have a typical Volkswagen 4-dial instrument cluster. You can see how high that diesel revs up. It revs up to about 5,000 RPM, which is fairly high for a diesel. It's a fairly simple but attractive layout. We have trip computer as well as vehicle settings going on right there in that monochromatic multi-information display right in the middle. Moving out to the steering wheel, you can see we have Volkswagen's typical 3-spoke steering wheel. It is a very comfortable steering wheel, has these nice sports grips up here and nice soft leather. Over here we'll find our radio buttons, and that's volume up and down, forward, backward, phone button, voice command button. And then over here, these buttons control that screen in the center of the instrument cluster with a little back button there. Up top, we have Volkswagen's version of OnStar available right here via these 3 buttons. We have an info button, a service button, and an SOS button. And this little knob right here controls the sunroof. This is kind of an interesting Volkswagen Audi group thing. You twist this knob to how much open you want your sunroof. I can't think of how better to describe that. So if you want your sunroof only to be halfway open, you twist it to there. And then if you move back, you'll see that the sunroof is about halfway in its tracks. If you want it open all the way, you rotate the knob completely like that, and that causes the sunroof to open the rest of the way. Same thing if you want to close the sunroof. So if you want to close the sunroof most of the way, then you can set the knob to that position right there, and then the sunroof will move to that position. The Passat scores 8 out of 10 points in our exclusive trunk comfort index because we have a fairly large area back here, but we also gain a few extra points because there's enough room under this load floor to handle a full-size spare tire. Now, admittedly, the Passat TDI does not come with a full-size spare tire. It does come with a donut, but if you're a guy like me that would really rather have a full-size spare tire, you can get one and you can actually fit it in the trunk of the Passat. We also have one thing that I really like, which is a nice grab handle on the trunk to help close it, and there's one on both sides of the trunk lid, so it's not just one-sided like you find in a decent number of cars. There also are a few other nice touches like these rear seat back release hatches that are right back here in the trunk rather than inside the car. So if you want to stuff something long in the car, you don't have to go in the car to lower this rear seat back. You can just pull this lever and then jam your long item in the trunk and fold the rear seat down. If you're watching this video from Europe and you're thinking to yourself, this Passat doesn't look quite like the Passat that I'm used to, then you're right. This is a North American Passat, and it's quite different than the European market Passat. In America, you can still buy a version of the European Passat. It's called the Volkswagen CC. It has underpinnings and interior that's relatively similar to the European Passat, but this North American Passat is quite a different car. It's actually built on an entirely different platform. It's the NMS platform from Volkswagen for new midsize sedan. This platform was designed to compete with the likes of the Toyota Camry and the Honda Accord, and it's really obvious dynamically out on these roads. This just doesn't feel as engaging as the Passat CC otherwise known as the Volkswagen CC these days. It does handle very well compared to a Toyota Camry or a Chevy Malibu, something like that, but it's just not as engaging as the Passat or the Passat CC. The steering is numb but accurate, very much like the Honda Accord and the Mazda 6, and the ride is fairly soft in the Passat, meaning that this takes third place in this segment in my mind, behind the Mazda 6, which is first in terms of handling and feel out on the road, and the next is the Honda Accord. I think that I personally prefer the way the Honda Accord feels out on the road versus this Passat, but the Passat does very well for itself. Acceleration is fairly average for the four-cylinder mid-size sedan segment, slotting right in there with the rest of the competition, from the four-cylinder Mazda 6 to the four-cylinder Ford Fusion, the Camry, and the Accord, etc. And of course, I'm not talking about any of the turbocharged versions of those, just the regular naturally aspirated gasoline versions. One thing to keep in mind is that the Mazda 6 will be available with a turbo diesel engine, we're told, by December of this year, so it's very, very soon from now, and that engine is supposed to be about 30 horsepower more powerful than the engine found in this Passat. It also has a decent amount more torque, so we do expect that to be a little bit faster than this Passat TDI. Out on the road, when you're driving along like this, it's really difficult to tell this transmission is anything other than a regular automatic transmission, but let's talk a little bit about what a DSG is. A lot of people seem to complain about DSG transmissions, but I think that's really just that a lot of people, especially auto reviewers, don't like thinking outside the normal, conventional automatic transmission box. The DSG transmission really is just an automated manual. It's actually two automated manuals. One of those manual transmission handles the even gears, the other one handles the odd gears. But the big thing you need to know is that it's a manual transmission. It has a clutch and it shifts gears, and so it feels very much like someone is driving a manual very, very well. So if we're on a slope like we are right here, and we stop the car, after a few seconds of releasing the brake pedal, you'll start rolling backwards, and that's because the car doesn't want to slip the clutch to try and burn it out or anything like that, so you have to press the gas pedal in order to get you moving again. You also get that slight feeling of holding a brake and holding the gas pedal down in a regular clutch-driven car. If you're used to the whole parking brake trick, it has that same sort of feel going on there when you're taking off on a hill. And if your hillside is a little bit slippery or a little bit gravelly, like this gravel road that we're on right now, then you can get just a little bit of wheel slip that you wouldn't find in a traditional automatic. The payback, however, is fuel economy. And fuel economy is excellent in all of the DSG-equipped vehicles. When you compare them to the regular automatic vehicles, you do save a decent amount there. And in my mind, it's definitely worth it. In many ways, the internals of a DSG transmission are also simpler. If you're thinking that maybe this is a much more complicated transmission, so it's prone to fantastic failure, there's actually a little bit less going on in transmissions like this because there are no planetary gear sets, which means there are actually fewer moving parts inside. Let's talk about fuel economy, because that's what the TDI is supposed to be all about. We've been averaging 36 to 37 miles per gallon in the TDI over our 700-mile week with this car. That is fairly good in this segment, but you do have to keep in mind that diesel is more expensive and that diesel exhaust fluid costs some additional money as well. That number is better than the 35 mile per gallon combined EPA score that Volkswagen is claiming for the Passat TDI. However, it's not quite as good as the gasoline-electric hybrid models in this segment, most notably that new Honda Accord hybrid, which gets 47 miles per gallon combined, but easily exceeded its EPA numbers in our testing. If you're trying to decide between a diesel or a gasoline-electric hybrid for your next car, and you're really just concerned about fuel economy, then you need to ask yourself what your commute is like. If your commute is very highway intensive, and by that I mean very steady speeds, relatively level roadway surfaces between 50 and say 70 miles per hour or so, then a diesel is probably going to be the more fuel efficient car for you. If, however, your commute involves a lot of stop-and-go traffic, a lot of city traffic, or a lot of low-speed driving, then a hybrid is probably going to deliver the best fuel economy for you, something along the lines of the Ford Fusion, the Toyota Camry, or even the new Honda Accord hybrid. The new Honda Accord hybrid did give us the best numbers so far in this mid-size sedan segment. I averaged about 48 to 49 miles per gallon in that Accord hybrid when we last had it. I haven't had it on my regular commute, but we do expect to see it very soon. Either way you slice it, that mile per gallon in a gasoline electric hybrid car is going to be cheaper to operate than a diesel car, because diesel in California especially costs about 40 cents per gallon more than a gallon of low-grade gasoline. You also have to factor in the fact that the diesel exhaust fluid has to be filled up about every 5,000 miles or so. It's a 5 or 6 gallon tank depending on the model of car you're in. It's about $8 a gallon for that diesel exhaust fluid. There are some slightly lower maintenance costs going on in a diesel car versus something like a regular turbocharged gasoline car, because you don't have spark plugs, and there are a few other maintenance items that are just a little bit different, and the maintenance cycles tend to be a little bit longer. But overall, there's not that much difference between something like a gasoline electric hybrid and a diesel in terms of regular maintenance cost. The regular gasoline Passat starts at $20,845, but the Passat TDI starts at $26,295 for that SE model. Feature content is slightly different than the V6 model, but pricing is relatively comparable. It's about a $3,000 upsell in order to get the diesel like for like compared to the regular gasoline Passat versus this TDI model. Our model here is the fully equipped SEL version, and it rings in at $32,995. The Passat TDI is about $3,000 more expensive than a regular Passat, and also about $3,000 more expensive than something like a Honda Accord EX with the 4-cylinder engine and the CVT transmission. When you take a look at fuel costs and fuel economy averages, even though we've been averaging better fuel economy in this Passat TDI than in the Accord EX, because of fuel costs, this is actually slightly more expensive to operate. It's also more expensive to purchase, so you do have to keep that in mind. However, when you compare the Passat TDI to something like a Honda Accord hybrid, which is my current favorite hybrid in the mid-size sedan market, the Passat is a decent amount less expensive. The Honda Accord starts at $29,155, meaning this is not that bad of a deal. However, that Accord hybrid is cheaper to operate. It's about $562 less a year to operate 15,000 miles a year based on the average driving cycle, because it gets so much better fuel economy and because gasoline is cheaper in California still. Overall, I really like the Passat TDI, and this is definitely a model that I would recommend, possibly one that I'd own. However, my two current favorites in this segment are the Honda Accord Hybrid and the Honda Accord Plug-in, and I would buy them before I bought this Passat TDI myself. The Passat TDI does make a good argument if you do a lot of highway driving, because it does get excellent fuel economy on the highway, better than the Honda Accord Hybrid, which is kind of interesting. Now, versus something like a Mazda 6, the Mazda 6 does handle a little bit better. I do find it more attractive than this Passat TDI, but the infotainment system in that Mazda 6 is truly awful. And upon reflection after that video, I would buy this before I bought a Mazda 6, even in the gasoline form. This version, especially versus the Mazda 6 diesel, probably still has the edge for me, even though that Mazda 6 is going to be more powerful than this Passat TDI. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that Mazda 6 turbo diesel is expected to not need to use diesel exhaust fluid because of the design of the engine and the emissions control systems, so that is something to factor into your decision. Again, I'm Alex Sykes. This has been my quick look at the 2014 Volkswagen Passat Turbo Diesel. Be sure and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. Be sure and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like about this video, and about the car in general. And we'll see you next week.